and see you this morning. I say distinct pleasure because this is the first event of the day, so you're only hearing this for the first time. Trust me, the song and dance may get a little old as we go along. But before we get into things, I want to give a huge thank you and a shout out to Suffolk University Sawyer Business School. Take a look around, look at the room, look very far outside those windows because if you're a Bostonian, you don't need to be taught this. Suffolk University offers really great learning opportunities both inside and outside these walls. So huge thank you. Without them, this would not be possible at all. Want to give you a little idea of what we're going to expect. The goal behind Startup Boston Week here. I'm sure you all know why you're here, but the reason we do this, the reason everybody is here is because we want to connect everybody in the Boston, Greater Boston, and New England startup ecosystems, all roles, all industries, all stages of startup, all funding stages. We're all here to connect and to learn. So take advantage of all the opportunities you have here, all of which free. Go to the events, go to the networking things. It's really awesome. Trust me. Speaking of all free, everybody who puts this on, we're all volunteers. Everybody who's doing this today, the folks in the back, all volunteers. So this is a labor of love. Give your volunteer a hug or a high five. And don't be afraid to come up and ask us questions. We're here to help. Right? I'm going to look at my paper here because this is the first time and I'm not quite caffeinated enough for today. So that's all for the announcements. We're going to be making sure to get you out on time. The last thing I'll mention, both to the panelists over here and to the people here, we encourage questions. We're going to be using these mics. Why? Because there are people who are dialed in virtually. So we want to make sure everybody can hear. So if you're a presenter or if you're asking a question when we hand you the mic, not like this, not like this, sweet spot right over here. Make sure the mic picks up your voice. Cool. So I'm going to hand it off to Jason over here, our moderator. You can get us started.
Good morning, everybody. How are we? You thought I was going to be quiet, didn't you? Yeah, you definitely did. Thank you, everybody. Welcome to Creating Your Future, Safe and Sound or Destination Unknown. Spoiler alert, definitely not safe and sound. The startup world is not safe and sound. Did I scare anyone off? Okay, great. My name is Jason Margasa. Quick 30 seconds about me. I started a media agency back in 2015. We specialize in production, creative, and marketing strategy. And recently, I've started a company, Fundworthy. We're a search fund and venture studio for second-time founders. So that's a little about me. Now we're going to start with our panelists, the important people here. And Vanita, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, sure. So I'm trained in biochemistry and computational protein engineering. From an academic postdoc, I went to a mid-sized pharma, EMD Serono. I stayed there for 14 years and really learned the ropes of drug discovery there. And 2 years ago, I joined my first startup where I am the SVP head of drug discovery research for Fable Therapeutics, a machine learning enabled biotech.
Very impressive. Very impressive. And now let's hear from the rest of our panelists. Rachel, if you want to go next and tell the people in here and at home a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm Rachel Salazar. I work at a company called Bicara Therapeutics. We're, again, a small startup. I joined about 3.5 years ago when we were still under 10 people. I spent most of my career in larger to mid-sized pharmas and decided to take the jump when we were looking at our Series A extension. And it has been a roller coaster, and happy to answer any questions about that.
Amazing, Rachel. Thank you so much. And David, a little bit about yourself.
Dave Howell. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at a company called Legit Security. We're a Series B cybersecurity based in Boston, joined in January. Since then, we've grown from about 50 employees to almost 100, so it's been quite a ride. This is my third startup, but prior to that, I spent about 15 years at much larger companies, RSA Security before it was acquired by EMC and Raytheon, among others.
Very nice. So thank you so much for sharing the information. And we're just going to get right into it. So we're here to talk about startups. So let's get into it. So we're going to start with Rachel. Rachel, so how did you make the decision to join a startup? That's kind of it's always an interesting leap in life. So I'd love to hear your journey on it.
Yeah, so I had really been a part of the larger pharma community for a long time. And you see a lot of these acquisitions coming in. You're like, wow, they have some unique science or they have some unique positioning. And going through the assessment of these smaller companies, you get to talk to these people a lot. And you're like, wow, these people have innovative ideas. They're hungry. They want to move science forward. And so I think that was my first peek into it. And so when I started looking into, okay, what would be my next step in my career, I felt I had a large enough, I guess, view on how actually drug development worked, but now it's time to really kind of apply it. And when in my career I thought that would be applicable, I thought, it's a time where I still want to be able to have enough energy to do it, because it is a lot. It's a lot of heavy lifting. It's not just a simple 9 to 5. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of different hats you wear. And so during my career, I thought, during this specific time, this was the opportunity I had. And if I was going to build something, I wanted to kind of take the bulls by the horn. So I found something I really felt passionate about, the science, the space. And so that was my jump into it, and really kind of taking that leap of faith and seeing where the road led.
Very cool. And David, what inspired your leap of faith, or was yours even a leap of faith? Or did you have some confidence really?
Oh, it was a leap of faith.
Okay.
No, and I'll build off what Rachel said around building. I think even when I was with larger companies, the kind of ability to go in and build a new program, build a team, start something from scratch was always really appealing. As I worked through in the cybersecurity industry, I started to see so much innovation that was coming out of startups and early stage companies, the creativity, the new approaches, the new ways of really thinking about protecting against attackers. And that's what led me to it. And so after about 15, 18 years in big companies, I made the jump over and haven't looked back. It's been great.
That's really cool. And Vanita, kind of piggybacking off of what they were saying, what was your journey, and what have you seen are the biggest benefits of joining a startup?
So one of the biggest benefits, I think, maybe it's a benefit for some people and a downside for others, but it's constant adrenaline and cortisol.
Yes.
So I think things are never boring. Also, having spent over a decade in big pharma, I was continually learning, but on a linear path of learning. So it was, like this. And then when I switched to startup, it was exponential learning, because I had 6 new things I had to learn. So, that's probably related to the adrenaline. But yeah, I think those are two. It's exciting and you learn a lot fast.
No, that's great. So I love how you brought up that, the adrenaline got ramped up, because it is what it is, right? Sometimes in a job you get really, you get kind of in a rhythm, but when you're in a startup, there's no rhythm. It's like one day it's salsa and the next day it's Ludovico Einaudi. He's a great piano artist, by the way. So now, what are some of those differences between startups and an established company? Just a quick note. I've been fired from every corporate job I've ever had, not for lack of performance, but I always had a hard time with the culture, although that's different now because the work culture is so different than it was, 10, 15 years ago. I'm 25 now, so I was 13 at the time. So would love to kind of hear, starting with David, the differences, from a startup versus an established company from your experience.
Yeah, the differences are very distinct. I'd say there are probably at least 3 key ones I'd point to. I think number one is, and this builds off what Vanita brought up a minute ago, is that you cannot sit in your own function. You have to look across the aisles and you have to understand sales, operations, finance, and you have to be willing to learn and participate as a leader across the board, right? You can't just focus only on what you have known and grown up in. I think number 2 is you have to be willing to take risks, intelligent risks, and move quickly and make decisions, right? With startups, you're moving 100 miles an hour. You don't have a lot of time to kind of, stare at your navel and think about things. You just got to make a decision and move, and then learn and fail fast. And I think the third thing is really being open-minded in terms of how you approach problem solving, and recognizing that, you have a small group of people, 50 to 100 or fewer, and you need to take as many ideas from across that team as possible in order to come to a decision. So I think it's really about decision-making, ownership, and being part of the larger team as opposed to your own kind of siloed team.
And David, I love how you brought up problem solving, because I think that's such a huge difference when you work for a larger company versus a startup. Rachel, would love to kind of hear your experience with that, problem solving at a big company versus being at a startup, because obviously there's a lot more responsibility on you at a startup.
Right. And I'm sure Vanita can echo the same thing. But when you're at a larger company, like a larger pharma, decision making is made by committee. and many committees and over again. So you get stuck in this repetitive cycle of I'm here meeting with this committee and they're giving their opinion. And then you meet with a slightly different committee that has about 50% the same people than 50 others because everyone feels they need to give their, 2 cents into a decision. With that startup, I mean, you guys are making the decision, hey, are you good with this? Good, we're going. You have to be comfortable with this ambiguity because there is no guardrails for you. You are looking at, okay, this is my best guess. This is the amount of data I have. We have to go. We have to move. And so instead of the 6 months of committees and reviewing, you're making that decision on the spot with the group of people that you have to trust. And that's a big thing. You really have to build the team around you that you're going to be able to trust and work with. And that has been something, within our company, we've been very, very protective of. We've met people who are very capable. But the thing is, you have to be able to trust the people that are sitting right next to you to make that decision, and that you're not going to be back and forth, second guessing one another.
Comfortable with the ambiguity. That's a great quote. Can we get that on a t-shirt? Can you guys, can we print that? So I really love that because that is such a thing that I don't think a lot of people really know what they're getting into. Things look great from the outside, but then when you get into it, you're like, oh boy, where we are now. So Lenita, if you could kind of expand on that, comfortable with ambiguity and kind of the cultural shift that you have to accept when moving from a big company to a startup.
Yeah. So to answer that, but also to build on what Rachel said, like when I was in pharma, we would set a strategy and then we change it like every 18 months. And I felt like, why are we changing our strategy so often? Right. And then, but there was like a comfort that you could, work towards a strategy. And for at least 12 to 18 months, you had that clarity of what I'm working for. And you just don't have that in startup because everything is life and death. So like if your strategy in big pharma doesn't work out after 12 months, you have to change it. Well, the pharma's still going to be there. Maybe the architect of that strategy won't be there, but the pharma's still going to be there. But if you are not willing to change your strategy as many times as it requires to get away from a losing strategy and onto a winning strategy, your company's gone. So you have to get comfortable with that, I think. And that was something that was part of what attracted me to startup, is being able to act on logic and intelligence and understanding the conditions. But it wasn't like instantaneous that I could retrain my brain to do that. So I did have to second guess myself for about 6 months and am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? And to your point, you need to have trusted people around you. So, but you need to get quickly used to saying I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. I'm doing the best I can and I better do it, because not doing an analysis paralysis is death.
So it's really funny you brought that up. I'm advising for a company right now, and we just changed our strategy so many times. But it's also because as new information comes in, that's what people need to understand. New information is coming in daily. You have to pivot to that new information. So I'm going to get a little personal. David, I'm going to start with you. Great experiences. What was like the aha moment you had when you actually made the switch? Like what was it? Was it something out of frustration? Was it something you needed a life change? What was that aha moment you had that said, I'm going to join a startup?
It was definitely a life change. So I'd spent a bunch of time in large companies and become really frustrated with the pace of decision making, the repetitive nature of it, and really the inability from my perspective to kind of see the material impact that I was making, because there were just so many people involved, the committees and the time. And so for me, like I said earlier on, I wanted to be a builder and to have the opportunity to go in and to start to grow a function and a team and a go-to-market motion with partnerships with sales, with the founder, with the CEO, was just what was so exciting and appealing. Now, I didn't see all the road bumps that were ahead of me. That's okay. We live and learn. But it was fun, and it was just a completely different experience. And I felt that at that point in my career, it was probably either you do it or you don't, right? Because after 20 years in big companies, people have a bias against that sort of background, or they often will. Not everyone. Let's not generalize, but it's often hard to go from a 70,000 person company to a 30-person company because there are questions about your ability to scale, your ability to roll your sleeves up. Have you just been sitting around in a big office, doing nothing for 10 years? And so once I had that opportunity, I leapt at it because I wanted to use it as the foundation to kind of continue to build and to move through the startup world from there on.
That's awesome. And Rachel, I'd love to ask you the same question. I think this is an important question for the audience. What was that aha moment that made you say, I'm going to leave the comfort, for lack of a better term, of a corporate company and go to a startup?
I think it's very similar. I think it was just tired of just being a cog in the wheel. Sometimes you're just part of the process. You're part of the larger pharma direction. And I really wanted to build something. And while you can build within your project, you're still beholden to a lot of the structure above you. And so after my project that I was on, didn't go the way we expected. Not that science really does 90% of the time, but I'm just like, this is my opportunity to really kind of jump and shift gears and really build something. And so, reached back out, said, okay, I need to find something where I feel like I can get behind, because you do have to be passionate about it. It's not something where you're like, I'm going to go to a startup and see if I can do it. You really have to have the motivation, the want to do it. And so I found a company, I found a good group of people I had, worked and trusted, in previous roles. I said, okay, this is my space. This is my opportunity. So I'm going to do this now. And I don't regret it. I mean, it has been a roller coaster. The ups and downs of funding are never good, are never fun, but in the end, you stick it out and you get to where you need to go.
Amazing. And Vanita, same question.
Yeah, I think for me, it was not so much an aha moment. I'm actually kind of a conservative, risk-averse person when it comes to my career, not when it comes to drug discovery. There, I love taking risks. But for my career, I was like, I don't know, this is pretty secure and stable, So for me, it was a couple of things that had to come together. One, I was at my company and I learned a lot over a long period of time. And that gave me the confidence that, I actually know how to do drug discovery, so maybe a startup would benefit. But I needed the time to develop the confidence in my own skill set, was one thing. And then another thing was just, there was that element of, I think the grass is greener. Like you said, Rachel, like when we would collaborate with small biotechs and, get that glimpse, I'd be like, oh, it looks like so much fun. And I knew that, okay, I'm seeing the best side of it because they're on the other side of the table. But I was like, I want to see if the grass really is greener. But I think my aha moment, if you can call it that, was when a colleague of mine just kept ribbing me. He's like, Vanita, you and I are going to retire and die at the same company. And I was like, oh my God, I better go to a startup now.
That's very cool. And for me, I've been called a bull in a china shop. So I had to work at a startup. I didn't have a choice. So I'm going to go a little bit off script because a few things that I'm starting to think about. So David comes from marketing. You two are in the biotech pharma sphere. Those are very different industries. So I kind of want you, David, I'll start with you. You all transitioned at different times in your career. So what would your recommended be from your perspective of the marketing? Do you think it's better to, have a few years in a corporate environment to learn? Do you think this is something that there's enough data out there to learn on your own? What would you recommend is a good course of action, in your experience?
So that's a great question. So what I tell folks who are coming out of school is that if you want to get into, I'll speak specifically to marketing, there are absolutely benefits to being in larger companies because you're going to have a much broader peer group in different functions of marketing from which you can learn, you can brainstorm, you can get feedback and mentorship. If you go into a startup, and I've hired folks out of school into startups, it's definitely a struggle at times, right? Because you have a limited pool of perspectives. Now, on the other hand, you're dealing with more senior people, right? So they're working with the CMO at the company, they're working with VPs at the company. So it's a real trade-off. I think personally for me, that idea of going into big companies, really building up my portfolio of skills in different functional areas of marketing was what allowed me to more painlessly transition into a leadership role within a startup.
Got it. And Vinita, the same question to you. Obviously, you can't go to Dunkin' Donuts and there's a lab in the back to use, right? So what would you recommend people getting into your industry? Like, what's a good course of action for the best education?
Yeah, so like Dave, I actually felt that my years in pharma really helped me now that I'm in the startup. But I think that there's like a little bit of confirmation bias going on there. So like, I don't think you can go wrong. Obviously, like if you jump into startup straight out of graduating, you're gonna have to learn the ropes from the bottom up. So yeah, I don't have too much in our industry. It's very similar to what you said. You're going to have like exposure to more senior people and see all aspects of the business. So you're probably going to learn that part faster. And then on the other hand, you're going to see a narrower set of things, like in a big pharma, like the one that Rachel and I came from. I still I'm amazed because like every time something new comes up at my startup, I'm like, I've seen that before. And I don't think like in a startup has to be focused. So you wouldn't see in our example, it's like the number of modalities that I've worked on in my big pharma experience. Every time we try to change our strategy, my boss is like, but can we do that? I'm like, oh, I know something about that.
Really cool. And I mean, I came from like straight up self-taught almost everything. And there definitely was moments where I said, this took me a little too long to learn. I probably could have learned this in a corporate setting. So I would just say, really just pay attention to the industry that you want to go into. Like I said, I came up in like a video field and marketing and social media. So, it's a little more loose, but there are different things that you can learn, both self-taught and also, the school of YouTube is incredible these days. It's amazing what you can learn. And I would say overall, education comes from within. You just gotta really, really want that. So now,
Can I just add one thing?
Please. Oh my God,
I
please.
think even like if you're just freshly graduating, probably your cohort is going to different places, some to startup and some to corporate. I keep in touch because I think you learn a lot peer to peer. And even now at this stage, I still reach out to peers from my old company and from my network to ask for advice. So I think that's another way to learn.
I love that. That's awesome. And Rachel, kind of staying with that, making these decisions, there's a level of self-awareness you need to have about yourself. Like I'm very, oh my God, startups. But I meet people who I'm like, do not join a startup. Like I meet people who you can just tell. So, what advice would you give to someone who's like self-reflecting? Like, am I right for a startup? Like, what kind of risk tolerance should they have? Like, how would you kind of explore that if you were talking to somebody who's like really looking to join a startup?
I think there's a few things you need to kind of start considering. I think, risk tolerance is definitely one of them. When we were in our early phases, we were, on fumes at the very beginning. You're gathering data every day. Like, so have we scanned this patient? Do we see any responses? We're going to JP Morgan. We need to try to raise funds. So, you are constantly hustling. So you have to be able to be willing to be prepared to have that company not exist next week, because there is that uncertainty around funding. I think the other part is that you have to be willing to be, wear so many different hats at so many different times that, like Vanita said, your learning curve is almost straight up. I came in and kind of to manage our early pipeline. But then, funding was not coming in. It's just trying to get water out of a rock at times. And so, okay, we're not doing a pipeline anymore. So we're focusing on our lead program, and then everyone shifts and pivots. So, I come from, an R&D space, but now I'm doing some manufacturing because we had no head of manufacturing, and I'm working with IP lawyers, and I'm, working on some quality documents, and I'm leading the program. So you're doing all sorts of things. So you just have to be prepared to step out of your comfort zone and be willing to take on these different things. Even if you don't know how, you find someone who can help you, kind of reaching out to your network. Your network is going to be very valuable because they can provide insights into how you can do something, or someone who can come and help you get through this hurdle. But I think just that part of being willing to step into so many different roles, that's going to be very important. And if you're comfortable with that, if you're comfortable with are we going to exist in a month? It's something that is part of that drive. If you can be like, well, I'm going to make sure that we're going to be open for, another week, another month. I'm going to go out to like 10 more VCs. I'm going to work my network. If you're comfortable with the hustle, then I think that's kind of where, you can find that aha moment yourself.
That's great. So I want to shift gears a little bit. There's the thing when you're at a startup is there's some really unique strategic decisions that come with working at the startup. So just a quick personal story of something that happened to me and my company 2 years ago. We started working with this very established guy. He's sold 4 or 5 companies, but at the time he wasn't paying us. So you got to make money to survive, right? So he's not paying us, but we're like, man, there's something here though. Like there's something here. So we just legit rode with this guy for like a year of no pay. And it completely changed our company. And we have since that really odd strategic, and it wasn't like he wanted to, it was just a really unique situation we don't have time to go into now, completely changed the trajectory of our company by 20-fold. Unbelievable. So, but again, I've made some of those decisions in the past that didn't pan out. So, that's just me giving an example. But Vanita, if you can just talk about some of these opportunities that come with a startup, and kind of everyone has different experiences, and like, how do you navigate those moments?
That's a good one. All right, maybe I'm just going to pass to Dave while I think about
Of course.
this.
Sure. So I think one of the things, and I'll give an example, just tell a story. So recently, we've been going to market around probably 5 or 6 different use cases for our product. And the concern that a number of us on the leadership team have had is that we're spreading ourselves too thin. We're 100 people, we have limited budget, we have limited resources, so we need to focus. And so we had an offsite after a big trade show with the executive team, and the key to this all is teamwork. And it's getting the right team together to talk about how we need to build our go-to-market and what that looks like. And fast forward, after spending about 2 days in a conference room together outside of Vegas, we'd beaten on what are our key messages? What is our ideal customer profile? What are the personas? And for those people and those organizations, where are they spending money? And that landed us on the 2 primary use cases, which is what we're going to use as our go-to-market focus going forward. So I think it's all about doing that as a team. If I did that alone, it probably would have failed. If our sales leader did it alone, probably would have failed. But bringing the founders, the technology leadership, sales, marketing together to really be critical about the way we're currently going to market allowed us to make decisions that I think are setting us up for more success going forward.
I guess just to build on that, it's about that agility. So, you have something in your mind, you think you're going to be doing this, and then if a different perspective comes in, and like one example is, I don't know how widespread this is, but in my company, almost monthly, a different perspective comes in from my board. And then it's like, okay, you have to react to that immediately. And very frequently, it's a good perspective because they're representing the investor on whom we depend, right, for our financing. So just, I agree, like you need the right team and you need to have that teamwork on it, but each individual in the team, and that's what I have to make sure is like that I'm consciously unlocking my mind to a different way of thinking about it so that I can capitalize on what initially seems like, why are you telling me what to do? To like, oh, actually, you're giving me some good advice. This is an opportunity,
Love that. And I just want to address, I got some dirty looks from the audience when I said that. And I just want to kind of address, a term I love called the currency of risk, right? She knows who she is. But everyone just always attributes the only currency is money, right? And I don't think that's the case at all, right? This currency, you got to take risks. So again, in this situation, just to add some more texture, it wasn't from a nefarious perspective. It was basically, here's an opportunity. I cannot pay you guys now, but if you guys help me push through this opportunity, and we did, and it exploded, and it changed the whole trajectory of our company to a thing. So that's what it was. It was a calculated risk. So I want to talk about that. People always look at the only currency is money. That is not true in the startup world at all. And I've had people I give opportunities to, and they're always stuck on, well, I'm 40 an hour. I'm like, okay, but I'm whatever an hour, but it doesn't always come down to that. There's this gray area. And I know this is a little bit of an ambiguous question, but I think it's important to talk about. This gray area that exists in the startup world, Rachel, when we all have different gray areas. What would you say is kind of your gray area? What are these kind of weird moments when you're in your job and you're like, wait a minute, this isn't this clean cut. I show up here, I get a paycheck, and I go home. When did you really start seeing that, oh, this is different? I think this is like the crux of what the startup world is.
I mean, it's almost all gray when you first start out. I think when you're starting so small, and with, again, kind of, you have different perspectives, but again, you have a limited number of perspectives. So for example, when we started out, we had a couple folks who were from like early phase development. And then you had some people from commercial, and it's like trying to bridge this gap. And I think, the gray for us was this in between, like between kind of the folks who were sitting up at the top, who were like, I know how to build a company from a business perspective. I know the commercial side. And then you had some of the folks who were like, oh, I know how to start up a study. And so bringing in like each of their perspectives on like, well, what is that you need in order for this to be successful? You start breaking it down into what are each person's needs, and then you start trying to connect them. And so that, I think, helped a lot of where we had just some gray areas, and just, again, maybe it's bringing in a person who can help fill in those gray areas. I think that's what we try to do now. And as we make decisions, we're all trying to bring our perspectives, and it becomes less and less gray. But there's always going to be various shades, new information that comes in. How does that change our, perspective? What do we need to work on in messaging? Here we've been talking about how good our data is, but oh, look, our competitors, like, very similar. But how do we now start to differentiate? How do we start creating that messaging that's a little different? And, to tie back a little bit into Vanita's, like, your board is a whole other appendage that you do have to start thinking about. Or have you built the right syndicate as you're pulling in different investors? Are they going to work together? Are they going to work against you? They're protecting their investment, but at the same time, they have to be your partner. And so, we had a couple times where, some new data came up, or something from a health authority came up, and they're like, whoa. I'm like, you want to be a little more aggressive and go this way. And they're like, no, I want to be a little more conservative because I've invested this much money in there, and I want to make sure I'm getting something in the end. And so you do have this push and pull. And so I won't tell you how many advisors they have given to us to, like, why don't you talk to this person or this person? And eventually you just have to cut them off. But again, it comes back to the less and less gray as you build it a little more. And you just get that momentum, that traction, and you can definitely move quicker.
I love that. And Vinny, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I have one example of a gray. Like, I think some of them, it's just, you just got to push through. And some, it's like, you're just not going to know until the gray clears out, and it's either black or white. And like, one example that I thought was like fascinating in my company. So we were in our seed stage, and we were like arguing with each other, do we pitch now for a Series A? Do we get more data first and then we go out? And like, every day we're burning cash. So like, this is a critical decision when we're going to start pitching, right? Because you start too early, you're not going to convince anybody. You're going to go through your Rolodex, and then if you start too late, it's going to be too late. And then after, while we were in the middle of this big argument internally, we hired our CEO. So we didn't have a CEO before, so it was just a bunch of us arguing, like, and our board members were acting CEO. And he came and he said, we're going to pitch. I was like, I was on the other, I was like, I'm not sure, like now's the right time. It was completely gray to me. Anyway, long story short, we closed our Series A last February. But
Congrats.
until we did, I did not know whether it was going to be black or white. You know?
No, that's great. I love that. And you're right. The further you go along, it starts to clear up because, you know, as money comes in, processes that they get defined and people start getting in the right positions, you hire some more people. So, David, I'm going to ask you, you know, during this process, is there a moment where like you question your decision to join a startup, but then like decided, you know what, I made the right move here?
Yeah, I would say probably about a month into my first startup, I kind of had a, oh my God, what have I done moment. And I think there are questions there. And, you know, my third startup now, there are questions that I would ask and things that I would probe on. And I think the one I would really point to is understanding the role of the founder, particularly if that person is the CEO. So I had not spent nearly enough time sort of examining the experience, capabilities, perspectives of the founder when I joined, considering his role as the CEO at the time. So I think subsequently, I've spent a lot of time poking on that in the two subsequent roles that I took on, really understanding as the CEO and the founder, what is your perspective on running the business, on bringing the other founders to the table, on leveraging the entire executive team? What's your view on culture? What's your view on like inclusion and all of that? So again, I think that, you know, I muscled through that and we figured it out, but it was a different experience and it was new to me. It was a learning curve. And it's one that hopefully I will not repeat again.
Yeah. Well, Dave, I give you props because I've been in the startup world for 10 years and I wake up every day going, what have I done? No, I'm kidding, guys. So I, you know, speaking of all this, I kind of want to get to, you know, I love the startup world. It's the funnest thing I've ever done. Like when I talk to friends, like, do you remember when you was 16? I'm like, yo, startup is way more fun than anything I've ever done when I was 16. So Vineet, if you can just talk about like just some of like the really enjoyable parts of why the startup world is so fun for you.
Yeah. So it's what Rachel mentioned earlier, agency, you know, so it's not all like a free for all, like everybody does what Vanita says, but there definitely, I definitely feel like I have more agency for the strategic direction. And then although it's kind of a lot of work, it's fun to wear multiple hats. So I'm getting closer to the science than I've been in decades. Well, not decades, I'm not that old, but at least years. You know, I've only been a decade and a half in the industry. But yeah, so I think like had I stayed in big pharma, I would have had more and more impact as time went on over the strategy and the governance. And I already was really enjoying that. But I also would have kept drifting further and further from the basic discoveries happening in the lab. And so, you know, although it was like quite trying actually to dust off the rust and come back to the science. I didn't go back in the lab, by the way. That would have been a step too far. But, you know, like really like kind of saying, okay, I've got to design some experiments. Like I haven't done that kind of experimental design in years. It's actually a lot of fun. But, you know, while continuing to develop like my strategic thinking and all of that.
That's awesome. Rachel, same question. What is just like so fun about the startup world for you?
I mean, part of it is just the ownership of it. You really feel like you own, this is your baby, this is your child. I mean, while you felt that in, you know, a larger farm, I'm like, it is like you are making the decisions, that you're not going through the different committees. You are saying, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to pivot. And it's the constant, what are we doing today? Because I will tell you, in the larger pharma, you had your 3-year plans and you were going to go according to this. This was your budget. This is like the Wild West. You're like, oh my gosh, I forgot about this. We have to do this. So here's new data. We have to pivot and we have to try this now. It's never the same day twice. And I think that's what I just love about it. You're not waking up in the morning like, okay, I'm going to go do, you know, my PowerPoint slides for my next presentation. It is, oh my gosh, I got this email, or, you know, okay, there's this analyst who's saying this. How are we going to do, you know, it is just a constant, you know, like I said, never a same day twice. And I think that's what I enjoy about it. There's always a surprise, which is both good and bad. but it is exciting and it's exhilarating when you think about it. It can be exhausting, but at the end of the day, you're moving something along and having a lot more ownership of it than you would somewhere else.
David, same question to you.
Yeah, so I think there are probably three things. One is just the overall energy of it, and I don't believe in saying your colleagues are your family, but it's a different culture and it's a different feeling when you're all building something together. Everyone in the room, everyone on the Zoom, and you're all like generally should be like rowing in the same direction. So that's super fun. I think the second is having authority and control and the ability to make the decisions that you need to make for your respective area. And I think from that, seeing the results, you're able to see results, positive, negative, or neutral, very, very quickly and make decisions based upon that. You're not sitting around waiting for a quarter, 2 quarters, for 3 levels of information to kind of peter down to you to make a change. So it's all of those things.
I love that. And I also, from my experience, I just think the opportunities of education just far exceed being in like one role, because like you said, you're wearing so many hats. You're looking things up. You're in Zoom meetings. Like, what did he say? And I'm every Zoom meeting every day, I'm typing in 6 things into Google to learn something new, which is great. So, one of the questions, I work with a lot of young people. One thing they all ask me is like, oh, what like skills do I need to have to enter a startup? I have a very unconventional background. I was a dancer and a music producer, and then I got into film, and then I got into learned about VC. I mean, it just really interesting. So, but from your experience, I'll start with you, Rachel. What like background or kind of like advice do you give to people who are like trying to thinking, okay, I want to do a startup? I met a kid at Venture Cafe the other day. Shout out to Venture Cafe, who was like going for finance, and he was asking me all these questions about how do you move from finance. So, what's some good advice of like what's a good starting place from like a skill set perspective to get into a startup?
I think from a skill set is, just again, first being just flexible, like being able to adapt to your environments. You can't be rigid in this and like, this is the process, this is how we do it. It is being able to adapt to the situation that you're facing every day. So I think being flexible, being adaptable is a big aspect. And also just being able to, for as much as this is a struggle for me, is the network. I'm like, I am an introvert and it takes a lot of energy for me to be out there and extroverted and to talk and to mingle. And I come home and I like want to close myself in a room, and my husband's like, where are you? The kids need you. I'm like, I need some time. But it is that social kind of perspective where you network. I mean, these people who you're asking money for or from, like, this is the social part of it. You create those relationships, you build those relationships, and they might not be fruitful the first 5-10 times you talk to them. I mean, I could tell you from one of our investors, I don't know how many times we emailed, and then we had a quick coffee, and then like, yeah. And then finally, 2 years into it, we're having a face-to-face meeting with these people we thought we'd never break down these barriers with. So it's that constant hustle, that engagement that I think is also important, because it is, again, at the end, it's about relationships.
And Vanita, same question.
Yeah. So I think like, especially like in tech or biotech, especially if you're in a technical role or any role, your skill set in that area, like science, research, finance, tech, it has to be solid, because there's absolutely no room for mediocrity. So you do have to I think you need to be the top 10%, top 5% in your area of specialty. So that's one thing. And then I agree with everything Rachel said. And the thing I'll add is you should have, I don't know if this is a skill or a mindset, but you should have a skill to not needing to be told what to do, but knowing what to do. Like that doesn't mean like you don't check it against, hey, Rachel, is this crazy? But like, I can't be sitting around waiting for Rachel to tell me like, can you drive this discovery program this way? Like you have to be able to think of it yourself And I think that those two things I would add to what Rachel already said.
Yeah, and Vanita, I'm going to add to that as well. I think what you're kind of hitting at is leadership is such a powerful trait to have in the space, whether you're the leader of the company or, like you said, you're wearing so many hats, you're such a small team. Everyone has to be a leader in some capacity. So that's one of those skill sets as a leader, I think, is very very universal, no matter what startup you are in. David, I'd love to hear from you coming from a different kind of, industry than they.
Yes, I mean, it was slightly repetitive, but I agree. I think a lot of it has to do with the softer skills. So your ability to be open-minded, put yourself out there, be a leader no matter what role or level you are in the organization, having comfort with ambiguity, and being willing to, what I'll tell people is, if you're really comfortable, it doesn't matter where you are in your career, and there's no right or wrong. But if you really require kind of the tracks to be laid out for you to move the train down, startup's not going to be a good fit for you, most likely. If you're comfortable kind of laying the tracks as you move the train along, could be a really good fit. So.
Very cool. That was a great answer. We still have some more, but I figured we'd get some questions from people. Does anyone in the audience have a question? Hang on. We're going to get you a microphone. Red in the back.
Yeah, for those of you that transitioned from larger companies to startups, did you experience a change in lifestyle, whether from the number of hours you're working or your compensation overall? Did you have to work it out with your family to kind of negotiate what things were going to look like? How did that work for you?
I did. I think, I'll just speak, at least from a woman's perspective as well. I have 2 young kids, and this was a big transition for them. So I talked with my husband because he's also in pharma. I was like, listen, if I'm going to transition to this type of job, it is going to require me to travel a little bit more. It's going to require me to put in longer hours. And it's going to, require just, again, that ambiguity, I need to take off to San Francisco for something. So part of that was a lifestyle change, because it is not just the, you come and you do your job and you leave. So I think thinking about that, how it does impact your life is important. I think from a title or pay perspective, the thing is, you're getting equity in this company. This is you're owning part of this company and you're driving it. So, if you're going to do the same role at a larger pharma, yeah, you probably get paid more. But in the end, this again is what you're striving to move forward. So again, I do think lifestyle will be impacted. And I'll let Vanita talk to that.
Vanita, did you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely work more weekends. It's not that I didn't. I worked very hard in pharma, but I'm working more weekends now. And yeah, to the compensation piece, that was a hard decision, because when we now have a 401k at my startup, but we didn't. And, so even though I was able to negotiate a compensation package and equity that I felt good about, so I didn't feel like my lifestyle would be impacted. But still, mentally, you're like, oh, you have to be, because equity is not the same thing as a guaranteed match on your 401k. So I definitely, and also my dog is fairly upset at the number of weekends I work, but probably not as upset as your kids.
And before I pass it off to David, I just want to add some context too. Sometimes you go from one amount to a lower amount for the potential for a much higher amount. So I think that's something you got to weigh. It's like, can I last this long for the gamble of the payout to be later, a year from now, 2 years from now? So that's something you got to weigh too. And David, I'd love to hear your experience in this space.
No, I think you nailed it. So I went from a corporate VP role at Raytheon to a Series A VP of marketing. So there's definitely changing compensation, and those are the decisions you make. It comes with equity. It comes with the chance to get into the startup world. And so there were long conversations with my wife about, would this be the right fit? Could we make it work? And we decided it was worth the gamble, and that if for some reason it didn't, you can always go back. You're not locked in it forever. So I think that you definitely plan for that. But I think, to the point that Rachel made as well, you own the company. You're part of the company. The equity you get, this is your baby to help build with everyone else on the team. So there's a different level of emotional, personal compensation you're getting, at least for me, than being a cog in a larger wheel.
Yeah, and maybe also that was just to build on one thing. That was an important realization for me that helped me make that leap. Was I was like, even if this company only lasts a year after I join, I will have learned so much. I will be so much more attractive on the job market. So that was also a form of balancing out the compensation difference.
Very cool. And I think we had a question over here as well. Can we get a microphone over here?
Thank you. Is this good?
Yep, it's great.
Thanks. If you had to allocate closer to here, if you had to allocate weights to what inspired you to make the jump, and maybe the founder, the idea, the prospective potential home run on the payout, the team, etc. How would you weigh those things in terms of what inspired you?
Vanita?
The home run was the least because, like I said, I'm risk averse. So I was like, I better be comfortable with this, even if I think the home run will never come. Definitely the fit to my own drug discovery and machine learning interest was a big one. Like, because if you're spending every weekend working on this, you better like it. So I think it was probably that one.
Rachel?
I would probably put the highest weight on the science. And I think for me, just personally, because I had worked with some of the science at my last job, and I think saw the errors of how a larger pharma manages it. And you always hear, well, we followed the science. It's like, no, you really didn't. You followed commercial. And so I think it was this opportunity to do it right that I'm like, well, hey, this is a unique opportunity. I'm like, I'm gonna be able to do it and actually follow the science and actually I'm gonna hold on to that home run, but actually make this work where it needs to work. So I think that's where my biggest motivation was.
David?
So I would say it was probably spread across, from my current role that I moved into in January, 4 different factors, 3 of which were today. The 4th would be the potential payout, the potential reward if the company does well. But the 3 for today were like the quality of the investors. Do we have funding from investors who made good decisions previously? Do they have a history? Do they have a strong track record? Number 2 is, does the leadership team, are they your vibe? Are these people you can work with? Do you like them? I probably interviewed for 40 hours with this team before taking the role. We'll talk about that later. But it actually worked out because it's like, it's almost like you're getting married. You're going to spend so much time with these people. It was worth it. And then the 3rd would be the overall market. Is the market you're going into one that's attractive? Is there a good product capability? So it was the combination of those that made it exciting for today. And then obviously potentially a prospect down the road.
And maybe just one other thing, like I didn't know enough to ask those questions, but after I made my decision and I was telling my colleagues, they're like, oh, Vanita, good decision. That's a top tier investor that's investing here. And I was like, oh, really? That's good. But it was just lucky. You should put weight on that.
Yeah. So my first 2 roles, I didn't spend nearly enough attention thinking about that. So again, that's what's great about being a startup. You're learning, even how to manage your own career.
Very cool. We have a question here.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you saying that, Dave, in terms of, we all talk about, running a startup, successful. Also, can we talk a little bit about what we learn, failure, and then what we do? Do we take a rest and then reevaluate everything? Can we mention a little bit about that too? If there's a failure, let's don't call this failure learnings, right? That your startup didn't succeed. How do you get out from that and then move on?
Yeah, so I'm happy to speak to that. So the first startup I joined was not a success. So we had an exit. We were acquired by a company. It was almost a fire sale. And there were a lot of learnings. I think number 1 is I would have done more inquiry around product market fit for the product. Did it deliver on the capabilities that we were selling, or were we overselling features? Number 2, what was the overall quality of the sales motion and the go-to-market motion, which fits into product market fit? And I think the 3rd thing and these are all things that I was able to kind of carry on into future roles. I spoke to this earlier, have a good handle on the rest of the executive team. And so these are things you learn, you move forward and you improve, but definitely it wasn't a home run by any stretch. Yeah.
That reminds me of the phrase, you win some, you learn some.
You sure do.
Yeah. Also, it ain't over till it's over. So if you have like some setbacks, as long as you still have some money in the bank, you just keep
Yeah.
trying
Yeah.
until you get a win.
It's great. I think we had another question. We have 2 over here.
Thank you very much for your time and sharing your perspectives. Super interesting panel. Rachel, early congrats on the IPO news for your company. Obviously a big accomplishment. Hasn't happened yet. Fingers crossed. You price it high in the range and it's a big success, but pretty awesome story here going from sub 10 people to an IPO. So congrats on that. Would love to hear a little bit more about how you think about the experience of the founder, experience of the leadership team, specifically around, did you go in with a first-time founder? Do any of you have experienced founders who's, second, third, fourth time, and whether life sciences or legit cybersecurity? Would love to hear about that thought process as you look at opportunities.
I think the management team, and I think we've talked about it, it's like you really do have to have faith in it. I think as I was interviewing, not quite 40 hours, but it seemed like 40 hours at times. I mean, I came in, I think that it was just a CEO and a CMO at the time, and and a CSO. So we were still fairly early. And the CEO, this was her first time as this in this role. So this was kind of like, okay, am I really going to hitch my wagon to like a first time CEO? I love the science, but I'm like, is she going to be able to drive this where it needs to go? And they were bringing in a COO, and I had worked with him previously. It's like, okay. And I'm like, can you please explain how you plan to work together? Because you're very different in where your skill sets lie and how you plan to drive the company. He said they both worked at Third Rock together and started Rios company. So they had kind of that founder, like I would say the training wheels the first time out. So they're doing this kind of in new roles, but have gone through the process before. And since they knew each other very well and they knew each other's strengths and weaknesses, it gave me a lot more comfort. It's like, Claire is she's going to be the business side of things. She's going to be the research side of things. She's a cancer biologist who has done the MBA work, has done the startup work. He's like, I'm going to work on the development side. This is where him and I had worked previously. And so that gave me comfort where I'm like, okay, they know each other's strengths and weaknesses. They know how they're going to work together. So that was the first kind of like, okay, this is good. They're not going to be squabbling over, well, you say we're doing this, but I think we should do this, because they were holding hands from the very beginning. And so I think that was one of the reasons why I felt a little more comfortable after, again, this is not an experienced management team. That's always some of the first things you look at. I'm like, is this management team experienced and has done this and know the pitfalls? And yes, we had, pitfalls along the way, but I think, again, their network from other VCs, other startup, incubators really helped kind of navigate that.
Amazing. And guys, I think we are out of time. So I want to thank everyone for coming. And also, just real quick before I pass it to our MC, if you have any questions, when's the next thing in here?
10:15. So we got a little bit of time.
So we have a little bit of time. Come talk to us up here, or we might be outside. So just encouraged to come and talk to you. Is everyone going to be sticking around for a little bit? Okay, fantastic.
Thank you to our fearless moderator, Jason. Thank you to our panelists, Dave, Rachel, Vanita. Thank you to you guys for attending and for your amazing questions. And if you didn't get to ask any questions, guess what? Great opportunity for networking. You can always follow up. There's your excuse. Okay, so big thing coming up later tonight for those who are sticking around all day. At 6 o'clock, we have our big keynote. I'm reading, so I want to get this right. With Yvonne Howe, Secretary of Economic Development, and Boston Globe's Scott Kirshner. That's going to be, again, here at Suffolk University. The next session in this room is going to be Scaling Startups, Advanced Strategies and Tools for Sustainable Growth. If that's you, great. Stick around, chill for the next 15 minutes, go get what you need to get. Just check in with the volunteers over here. They're going to want to make sure they check your information so we can have an accurate count of who's where. If that's not you, all good. You can head to your next session. The folks at the registration desk will be able to help you find where you need to go. Also, one very cool thing, speaking of networking and boosting that little LinkedIn profile, we have Kevin Ty of, let me make sure I get this right, 3 Circles Studio. He's our photographer here. He's going to be taking pictures all over the place. He's going to be getting to know who you are. And there's a little placard on that table back there. There's a QR code. Check that QR code. That's how you get a personalized album. So you can get some awesome pictures of yourself, blast them on LinkedIn, show everybody how beautiful you look and how cool it was that you were at Startup Boston, and talk about what you learned. So thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, folks over here. We'll see you at the next session.
Thank you.